What's going on, YouTube? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Texas Street Stories. And if you haven't already subscribed, help your boy out and hit the subscribe button. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Texas Syndicate and the Texas Mexican Mafia wars of the 80s. For decades, the Texas Department of Corrections, the second largest prison system in the United States, was virtually free from inmate gang disruption. This condition might be attributed to the institution of the officially approved building tender system. Building tenders, often referred to as inmate guards, were inmates carefully selected by prison officials to assist in the performance of staff work. With proper supervision, not only did the building tenders effectively maintain order among the inmates, frequently through the use of force, but more importantly, they served as an intelligence network for prison officials. In fact, up until 1983, the only known inmate group in the Texas prison system was the Texas Syndicate, a self-protection gang formed by a group of prisoners who had been members of the Texas Syndicate in the prisons in California. Outnumbered and closely monitored by the building tenders, the Texas Syndicate caused no major disruption. Despite its usefulness, the building tender system, along with several other aspects of prison operations, was declared unconstitutional by Chief Federal District Judge William Wayne Justice in the historic prison lawsuit of Ruiz versus Estelle, 1980, which involved the testimonies of 349 witnesses and consumed 161 trial days. It was during the period the inmates began actively to organize themselves to fill this power vacuum. Texas Department of Corrections statistics showed that in March 1983, there was only one prison gang, the Texas Syndicate, with 56 members. 2.5 years later, 8 inmate gangs, along with several other small groups, formed, and the reported membership increased to 1,400. As these prison gangs competed for power and dominance, the number of serious and violent incidents also sharply increased. From 1981 to 1984, assault against staff increased from 4 to 129. And inmates fought among themselves more frequently. Wars between the inmate groups that had been suppressed by the build tenders were now openly engaged. In 1984 and 1985, the White Aryan Brotherhood fought the Black Mandingo Warriors out of race hatred, and the Texas Syndicate fought the Texas Mexican Mafia for control of Hispanic inmates and the prison drug trade. In 1980s, and the deadly war that these people started to regain control of their prisons, the Mexican Mafia's number grew so fast that the Texas Syndicate started recruiting whites. Every single day, there was a stabbing or a killing. Everybody had a knife. Nowhere was safe. Each day, when you left your cell to go to the day room, the rec yard, or the chow hall, it was not a question if someone was going to be shamed. It was a question of who was going to be shamed. In 1982, the year process of eliminating the building tender system, members of the Texas Syndicate were reported to be responsible for 41% of the 12 inmates' homicides. In 1984, 20 of the 25 inmate homicides were found to be gang-related. Of the 20 gang-related homicides, 6 were committed against members of the Mexican Mafia by members of the Texas Syndicate. During the same year, 404 non-fatal inmate stabbings an all-time high in the history of the prison system, were reported. In the first 3 quarters of 1985, 27 inmate homicides were recorded, on which 23 were gang-related. Of the 23 gang-related homicides, 13 were committed against members of the Mexican Mafia by members of the Texas Syndicate, while 3% was committed against members of the Texas Syndicate by members of the Mexican Mafia. According to Jose, like, I guess he was probably a informant, snitch. The Texas Syndicate went to the upstart Mexican Mafia at the Darrington unit, where the Mexican Mafia were selling cannabis, and told them, you know what? We want a cut. You got to pay taxes. Now, the Texas Syndicate thought that the Mexican Mafia would be scared of them, that they were just going to lay down. But the Emmett were no punks either. They were stand up too. They were somebody to be reckoned with. In August 1985, the Texas Syndicate declared war on the Mexican Mafia, the largest inmate in the Texas prison system, by fatally assaulting 3 Texas Mexican Mafia members, first at the Darrington unit, from there it spread to other ranchos, Ellis 1, Ramsey. Both sides were putting in work, catching bodies, stabbing people left and right. September 1985, after considering all available strategies, the director of the Texas Department of Corrections ordered the emergency detention of all confirmed and suspected gang members. These inmates were subsequently assigned to security detention groups, assaultive or security group detention B, non-assaultive, on a permanent basis, subject to review for release every 90 days. The continuing process of confining group members to administrative segregation resulted in a sizable increase in the administration segregation population, from 1,860 inmates on September 5th, 1985, to 3,000 on January 29th, 1987. The severity of the war between the Texas Syndicate and the Mexican Mafia has not only been felt within the Texas Department of Corrections, but in the free world as well. Law enforcement agencies in the several metropolitan areas have identified several recent homicides committed on the streets as being directly related to this war. Despite efforts by some members of both groups and by some public officials to propose peace treaties, the war has continued to escalate. An inmate was stabbed to death today, the 4th fatal stabbing in state prison in 2 days, permitting officials to impose an emergency lockdown at 13 units to quell violence among rival gangs. The inmates, Leonel Perez, 31 years old, was the 26th person to die this year in the nation's second largest correction system, one more than the record of 25 last year. Director of the Texas prison system, which contains 37,000 inmates, said, our major concern is that it appears to be open warfare. Mr. Perez died of 15 stab wounds in the infirmary at the Ramsey Unit 2. October 23, 1985, Huntsville, Texas. Leaders of 2 Hispanic gangs with members spread throughout the Texas prison system have proposed a peace treaty to unprecedented series of inmate stabbings. San Antonio attorney Ramon Cervantes, who was involved in the negotiations, said a 4-page treaty would be sent this week to inmate leaders of the Mexican Mafia and the Texas Syndicate. TDC spokesman Phil said prison officials questioned whether the negotiations will end the gang conflicts. These are people who don't play by the normal rules used in diplomatic etiquette, Philip said. It's hard for these types of things to go into place and for them to hold. There may be more than one gang involved, and it becomes more complicated than just two parties agreeing. 7 inmates murdered in a span of 8 days at the end of August were believed to be gang-related. At least 2/3 of the 27 inmate killings this year are attributed to the gang war, officials said. The 2 inmates, both housed in the same TDC unit, made the peace proposal in the letter sent this month to the Prisoners Defense Committee, a prison reform group in San Antonio. Cervantes is associated with the group. They want the bloodshed to stop, but the treaty talk came out of the clear blue, said Cervantes. There's a lot of frustration that the prison system administration is not doing enough to end the violence. The inmates, Mauricio Cardenas, 37, serving life for heroin possession, conviction, and Juan Dimas, 28, serving 20 years for murder. Cardenas is a member of the Mexican Mafia, and Dimas belongs to the Texas Syndicate. In a war, as we now find ourselves, there will never be a winner, only losers, said the inmate statement. In such a war, where in order to conquer the enemy, we must destroy ourselves as well. It is not a victory, but a defeat. Last TDC Director Olaine McGutter last month locked all suspected gang members, about 900, in high security segregation cells. The TDC temporarily cut off the mail between gang members because officials believe the mail was used to arrange death contracts. Investigators said prison gang members are becoming more sophisticated and communicate in a complicated written code and maintain contact with organized crime on the outside. In a written testimony, Cardenas said he felt convicted that he needed to accept Christ as Lord after reading Mark 5:26 on the front page of newspaper delivered to his cell February 3rd, 1991. That day in his cell, he prayed to accept Christ as his Savior, but Cardenas feared letting his fellow gang members know about his new faith. He didn't know what might happen to him when he tried to quit the gang, known for its blood in, blood out policy that indicates members must die to leave it. I wanted God in my life, but I was afraid, he wrote, afraid of the consequences I had to face up to in a monster I helped create. So like Jonas, I said, no way, find someone else, and I went the other way. Cardenas insisted God continues to work in his life, convincing him that he needed to leave the gang. God used a series of physical elements, including 2 strokes and 3 heart attacks, to get his attention. He finally relented to what he felt was God's calling. I went to the recreation yard. There were about 40 members of the M, and I told them in plain, simple Spanish, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, and I am backing out of the M. I've thought it over long and hard, and I know the consequences of this action. You guys do what you have to do. It was an honor to have served as your leader. Now it is an honor to serve Christ. As he walked away, Cardenas said in his mind was at peace. Something told me I was in God's hands. And as long as I was in God's hands, nothing and no one could hurt me. Not even I could hurt myself. The gang has not hurt Cardenas. Several months after he told them he was leaving, they allowed members to leave for religious reasons. Other members joined Cardenas in breaking ties with the group. The prison administration, in an attempt to restore control over the prison yards, responded by isolating every leader they could identify in administrative segregation. With leadership weakened and in need of replacements, both the Texas Syndicate and the Mexican Mafia competed for recruits to replenish the ranks of leaders, and soldiers effectively challenged the other for dominance in the penitentiary. Local street gang members from major cities were being recruited by the Texas Syndicate and the Texas Mexican Mafia. It left a power vacuum and vacancy that the Tangos were already there to decide to join. El Paso inmates who were less likely to have associations with either the Texas Syndicate or the Mexican Mafia, given the geographical isolation of the Paso del Norte area from the rest of Texas urban centers, where thou sought by both groups, setting the stage for the birth of Barrio Azteca. So that's everything that's been documented from this time. It was a pretty bloody war on both sides, with both of them saying there was no winner. But what I'm curious is, what was in that peace treaty? Did that peace treaty declare that San Antonio became the MS headquarters and that they were going to recruit strictly people from San Antonio? Or they were going to use the tango that was already there for their soldiers? You know, that's in the 90s. This took place in the 80s. The 90s, there's really not too much documented. You would have to find somebody that was there at the time. And there is still some that are around, but they don't really like to talk about it. But if you've been there in the 90s and you were there, drop it in the comments. You know, because all I know my history is from the 2000s. And every organization has a history, and every organization has a very interesting story. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Texas Street Stories. If you haven't already subscribed, help your boy out and hit the subscribe button.